So have you ever just passed up on a great opportunity for no apparent reason? I've done that on a lot of different ways. Yesterday, I went to Crossroads Park, otherwise known as Rainbow's End, otherwise known as the Walmart Park, however you want to call that. I just wanted to take a couple laps around the pond and spend some time with God there. And then when I was done, it was about lunchtime, so I wanted to go get something to eat. And as I passed by Toys R Us, there was a Toys R Us shopping cart right in the middle of my lane on Fashion Square Boulevard. And I switched lanes and went around it and went to Burger King. And I could have pulled into the Toys R Us parking lot and walked out into the street and pushed the cart back up to the store, but I didn't. And my excuse for that was that I wasn't as far along in my message preparation for tonight as I felt like I should have been at that point yesterday. And I had a really hard time focusing, and I was just so distracted yesterday morning, and that's why I went to the park, so I could spend some time with God and be able to get focused. But I ended up being distracted at the park too, and there's this really stiff, cold wind right before the first set of rain came through. And so it wasn't really a nice place to be like I thought it was going to be. And so I had this distracted, quiet time, and then I saw the cart, and I just went around it and got something to eat. I could have stopped, done something about it, but I didn't. And I feel kind of bad about it now and hope that didn't cause any accidents or didn't dent anybody's car because there's a shopping cart there in the middle of the road. A different way that is I often see people on campus that I recognize. And I usually try to stop and have a conversation or at least say hi or smile or wave, do something to show that I care and to show that just demonstrate God's love. And that's what I do usually. But sometimes, if they don't seem to notice me, sometimes I won't flag them down and I'll just let the opportunity pass by. Not because they looked like they were on a mission and didn't need to be bothered, but just because I didn't feel like it. And just wrapped up in my own thoughts and my own plan, whether that was urgent or not. So, for no particularly good reason, sometimes I let good God opportunities pass me by. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to learn from some passersby and people who would have done that in the Bible. And I bet all of us can relate to that, but I want to make sure that we're really personally in tune with this topic, so we're going to do a little exercise. I want you to find a partner or two near you, and we are going to take a couple minutes, and I'd like you to share an opportunity that you let pass you by. Maybe it was something similar to what I shared. Maybe it was an idea that you had and never did anything with it. Maybe something completely different, but like an opportunity for good or a God opportunity that you just passed by and you kind of wish that you wouldn't have. If you don't know the person next to you, that's okay. Just introduce yourselves and just give it some thought. Don't just say, oh, I don't know. Like, ask God to bring something to your memory if it's not already there. And we're just going to take a couple minutes to do that right now. So, go ahead. Some of us were able to think of an example of something we let us pass by. And were you able to share that example? So most of us, just about all of us, were able to come up with something. And we just shared something that was real. We just learned something that was real about someone else. So that's a great piece of real community. So tonight, we're going to look at a couple examples from God's Word and then apply that with a challenge afterwards. And in case you didn't really know the person next to you and you're thinking, great, all this person knows about me is my name and an example of when I dropped the ball. Don't worry about it. We're actually going to come back to our partners towards the end of the message in a positive way. So we'll not leave that hanging on a bad note. So with Easter approaching, last week we started a series called Resurrected. And we're looking at the people and the events that surrounded the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And tonight we're going to start with an event in Mark 15. And last week we left off in the Easter story with the crowd had just demanded to crucify Jesus, and Pilate had conceded to their wishes. So we're basically going to pick up right where that left off. Mark 15, verses 20 through 22. Says, "And when they had mocked Jesus, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. And they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull." So I'd like to set up the scene because visuals always help me, and I like that background. Just before this, Jesus had been flogged severely by the soldiers. So they used these whips that had multiple tips to them, and they had tied broken pieces of bone and maybe glass or metal onto the leather strands. So as they whipped him and yanked it back, it literally shredded his skin and his muscles down to the bone. And then after that, they brought him back into Pilate's headquarters, where they mocked him as the king of the Jews. And they put this crown of thorns on him. And it says they took a staff and beat the crown against his head, beat the thorns into his head. And then they set that rough cross on his bared nerves, on the exposed nerves on his back, and expected him to carry that to the execution site. And the way there was kind of a main road going in and out of Jerusalem. And they would set up the crosses just off the side of the road so that it would make a spectacle, and the fear would deter other people from committing crimes. That was kind of the idea behind that. And the crucifixion site was called Golgotha, and that's the Greek word for skull. And along with that, the word Calvary is the Latin word for skull. And not to be confused with cavalry, which is an army unit on horseback. So Calvary, cavalry, two different things. Golgotha was a hill, and it wasn't named because of the crucifixions that were held there. It was probably the other way around. They set that as the place for the crucifixions because it was Skull Hill. And just to bump up the intimidation factor a bit. So here's a picture of what they believe to be Golgotha, or at least that's what they tell the tourists today. And Jerusalem, over the centuries, had a great need for rock and stone in all the building projects they did. And so they would get their rock from wherever. They'd quarry it out of the sides of hills. So depending on where the good rock was in the side of the hill, you might they might have hewn out something that looks like the far right side of the picture. And if we take another look at that, it might kind of look like a skull there in the side of the cliff. And just remember, there's been 2,000 years of erosion on this cliff face since Jesus, and they probably quarried out more rock that explained all the bigger holes in the hill as well. But 2,000 years ago, that might have very much looked like a skull. And you know, did the road go over that hill? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. A lot of times we picture the cross is up on the top of a hill, but why would you build a main road over top of a hill? You'd go around it, right? So if the road went right in front of this, and there's crosses here with executions with this skull cliff face in the background, that would be pretty ominous, and that would get their picture across. That's what they were going for. So back to the narrative. Because of the severe beatings that Jesus had just had, he physically was unable to carry the cross. He kept stumbling and collapsing under its weight. So instead of the soldiers just picking up the cross and taking it themselves, they recruited a random person from the crowd to do it. And they chose a guy named Simon, who was from Cyrene. And Cyrene was in Libya on the north coast of Africa. So he was not a local. He might have been on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the Passover, or maybe he was originally from Cyrene and had moved to the area around Jerusalem. We don't really know the details of that. But if there was any reason for the soldiers to pick Simon out of the crowd, like he might have just been the one closest standing to them, or maybe he was like the biggest guy they could see, and they just, I can imagine the soldiers getting sick of all the stumbling and delays, and they just wanted someone strong enough to get the cross there and get it going to the destination. And the soldiers had the authority to recruit random people. They worked for the Roman Empire, and they had swords, so who's going to say no when they recruit someone for something? During his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus had kind of addressed that issue of soldiers compelling people to do something. In Matthew 5:41, he said, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, sounds like something a Roman soldier might force you to do something. Wouldn't it have been ironic if Simon of Cyrene had been in that crowd on the side of the mountaintop when Jesus first taught those words? Someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2, just to demonstrate an attitude that we should reflect. In Matthew, that we read in Mark 15:21, Mark had called Simon a passerby. And that strongly suggests that he would have kept going had the soldiers not recruited him. And if so, he would have passed by the opportunity to help Jesus out. It's possible that Simon had just arrived into town and had no idea what was going on. Just some common criminal on his way down the road to be executed. But it's also possible that he had been in town long enough to hear about Jesus' teachings and his miracles. Maybe he'd been in town that whole week and had experienced that himself. And maybe he knew Jesus was innocent, but he just kind of, avoided his eyes and really wanted to avoid the whole situation entirely. He was just going down the road, but he didn't want to get tangled up on it. He had places to go. Regardless, he was literally forced into the situation. So another thing that Jesus had said earlier in his ministry, which would have been ironic if Simon had heard this, was in Mark 8:34. It said, in calling the crowd to him with his disciples, Jesus said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And in Luke's account of that road to Golgotha, in Luke 23:26, he gives the detail that Simon carried the cross behind Jesus. So what Jesus said about denying yourself, taking up the cross, and following him, that's literally what Simon was forced to do. He denied his plans. He shouldered the cross, and he followed Jesus to Calvary. There's another account that happened earlier in Jesus' ministry that relates to this idea of being a passerby. Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. So that's a longer passage if you want to flip there or scroll to it on your phone. Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. Behold, a lawyer stood up to him to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who's my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road. When he saw him, passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. When he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, poured on oil and wine. And he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. So in Jesus' parable, the priest and the Levite, these are guys that are supposedly in full-time Jewish ministry. They're supposed to be representatives of God. And they saw their fellow Jew and just passed by and avoided the situation. Maybe they pretended that they didn't notice, or maybe they were thinking, oh, he's a goner. Well, I don't want to be late to my Torah study, so better get going. Too bad for that guy. And then the Samaritan man comes along. And the Jews did not treat Samaritans well. They called them dogs, looked down on them because although the Samaritans had a Jewish ancestry, long ago they had intermarried with pagans and had departed from the Jewish law. And so when Jesus' listeners heard that the Samaritan comes onto the scene, they're probably expecting him to be the villain. Like, this guy is going to finish off the wounded guy. And but there's a plot twist. The Samaritan man was the guy who decided not to be a passerby. He's the one that demonstrated kindness and God's love to the man in need. This parable is where we get the idea of being a good Samaritan. So, no soldier forced him into service. He willingly put his busyness aside to love his neighbor. The next 2 weeks here on campus are going to be very busy for most of us. Wrapping up papers and projects, studying for exams, tying up other loose ends, and then throw Easter weekend in there as well, as if there wasn't enough else going on. So it will be more challenging than usual for us to go the extra mile for someone. It will be more challenging than usual for us to shoulder our cross and follow where Jesus is leading. It will be more challenging than usual to make time to love our neighbor. It's going to be busy these next couple of weeks. It's possible that we might be thrust into a situation where we're forced to engage like Simon from Cyrene, but it's more probable that we'll just be given the choice. We can participate, we can engage in that opportunity, or we can just let it pass by. So over these next couple of weeks, when God opportunities present themselves, will I choose to be a passerby or a participant? When these God opportunities present themselves, will I choose to be a passerby or a participant? Like I said, these next 2 weeks will be a great test of that. Which am I going to choose? If we choose to engage, it will come at the cost of modifying our plans. Like, we're going to have plans for these next 2 weeks, and God puts an opportunity to serve him, to do good in front of us. If that wasn't already part of our plan, we would have to modify our plans in order to do that, to engage in that. And if so, it'll be okay. There's certain things that we need to get done if we want to do well in school and honor God that way. But if we do engage in those God opportunities, He's going to bless that. It will be worth it. But if instead we choose to be the passersby, it'll be like what we shared at the beginning with our partner. Maybe a little regret for not taking that opportunity once we're past it. But whether we choose it or kind of thrust into it, if we're not those passersby, it will result in a great blessing. Not only will we avoid those regrets, we'll be blessing others, and it will be helping ourselves grow. And that's the idea we need to latch onto when we see those opportunities and know we're going to have to modify, we're going to have to change something to go through and engage in that when we're tempted to put it off. So, I'd like us to turn back to our partners now, and we're going to answer a few questions. Take a few more minutes to do that. So those questions are, what's a God opportunity that you have taken advantage of, even if you were tempted to pass it by? Second, what's something your partner could be praying about for your upcoming opportunities, especially in these next couple weeks? And maybe that's prayer that you would want, a specific opportunity. Maybe it's how you'll respond when you recognize opportunities. Maybe you can trade name tags and put a little keyword on it to be a reminder to be praying for this person over the next week or two. And then if you have time after everyone shares, pray about it together. And if praying out loud isn't really your thing, that's your first opportunity that you're going to be thrust into. So let's just take a few minutes to do that. Go ahead and talk with the partners you were talking with at the beginning. For opportunities, so that is awesome. And like I said, if anyone was a little bit uncomfortable praying out loud, if you're able to get to that, it might have been that first opportunity that you're thrust into, just like Simon. And I'm sure there will be more opportunities over these next couple weeks that God is going to make clear to us. Just an opportunity to do good, an opportunity to represent Him, to show God's love. Spend time with God, spend time with His people. So the finish line is in sight, but that does not mean that our opportunities to influence this campus are over yet. I'll say that again. The finish line is in sight, but that does not mean our opportunities to influence this campus are over yet. Because it'd be really easy to check out spiritually these last couple weeks, but God's going to put those opportunities in front of us that we can continue in. So when I see those, will I choose to be a passerby or a participant? Will I engage in those? And I've been a passerby at times, and I get that. I know what that's like. But will you join me in striving to be the participant, the one who grabs those opportunities and takes advantage of it, like the Good Samaritan, and watching God bless those situations and the impact that we could have through that? Let me pray.